everybody. Can I just get a quick sound check before we get started?
Hi, this is Sherry.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Conference on Asian Pacific American Leadership's Washington Leadership Program, the virtual edition. This session is being recorded, and all materials and recordings will be shared after the session. My name is Liz Jung, and I'm a board member with CAPAL. We are a nonprofit organization that builds the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander AANHPI public service leaders for providing formative professional experiences and growth opportunities. And we've been supporting emerging leaders for more than 30 years. And to provide a bit of background, our Washington Leadership Program is a signature series that covers a broad range of timely and thought-provoking topics that affect AANHPIs in order to provide emerging leaders with a valuable foundation of insights and knowledge about public service and different professional career paths. Our theme this year is Moving Forward, which highlights prominent issues affecting the country through an AANHPI lens, as well as providing attendees with actionable items and key takeaways to drive change for themselves and for others. Last week's session was postponed for another time, and if you have any questions about the postponement, please read our full statement at www.capal.org on the initial event page or email info@capal.org. Today's session, AANHPI Women in Public Service, Overcoming Challenges in the Workplace, will connect participants with AANHPI women leaders, giving voice to their professional experiences as minorities in public service, and includes a non-female identified ally to be part of the conversation. This session focuses on the challenges by AANHPI women in public service and the workplace. Key topics of discussion include gender pay disparity, experiences of discrimination or alienation in the workplace, and the impact of the Me Too movement on AANHPI women in public service. I'd like to thank our speakers for their time with us this evening, and thank you all so much for joining in. We have a special thank you to AARP for being a program sponsor and the DC Mayor's Office on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs for being a partner and a strong supporter of our program. Tonight's program will include a presentation from the Center for Asian Pacific American Women, a panel discussion, and time for Q&A. Throughout the session, feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A and know that we actually only are going to take questions from the Q&A box. After our session concludes, there will be a short survey that will pop up for you to complete. Your feedback is valuable to us and we want to hear from you. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sue-Ann Hong, who will set the stage with a brief presentation. Sue-Ann is the president and CEO of the Center for Asian Pacific American Women, or CAPAL. CAPAL works towards nurturing the AANHPI community by expanding leadership capacity, fostering awareness of AANHPI issues, creating a supportive network of AANHPI women leaders, and strengthening the community. Over to you, Sue-Ann.
Thank you so much, Liz, and everyone, welcome to this amazing night that we can spend together with the panelists. But before we begin the actual panel discussion, I wanted to start with getting you to think a little bit by doing a little quiz or trivia. So I'm going to ask Young to bring up the PowerPoint, and there's going to be 5 questions for you. And there'll be a couple questions that you'll be able to answer in your chat box, and there's also a little bit of a polling process. So let's start with the very first question. You would go to the first question for me, Young. All right, so AAPIs are the fastest growing racial group in the US from 2011 to 2016, and the population grew by 18% compared to population growth of 4% nationwide. Name one of the top 5 states that have the fastest growing AAPI growth rate. So you can name any of the, okay, so I see California, I see North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, no. Texas, nope. California, nope. New York, no. Iowa, Ben, yes. Hawaii, no. No, not Ohio, not Michigan. Not Arkansas. You guys are like, no, not Pennsylvania or Virginia. Florida, you're gonna go through all the 50 states? Oregon, no. Illinois, not Alaska. All right, here we go. Ready? South Dakota, Wyoming, North Dakota, Indiana, and Ben said Iowa. So those are the 5 states that actually have the fastest AAPI growth rates. And in fact, those 5 states had over 30% increase in population. So I just want, and by the way, the most rapidly growing population, obviously, with the AAPIs, and by 2060, it is projected that we will have over 40 million AAPIs. So that's an amazing, I just wanted to kind of set the groundwork about the power of our population and the diversity of our group. So that's a great start. All right, so next question. Let's go for another one. All right, this is a yes or no. I think this is a polling question, right, Young? All right, are non-citizens counted in the US Census? Yes or no? I love the fact that you added hosts and panelists can't vote, so no cheating for our experts. Yes or no? All right, I'm going to give it 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Young, what does the poll say? Oh, we got a split here. 75-25. Yes, they are counted. Every person is counted in terms of the US Census, and that includes non-citizens. So great. All right, next question. We'll get you thinking again here. One more question on the census. During the 2020 census, the Census Bureau will ask you for your social security number, money or donations, anything on behalf of a political party, your bank or credit card account, or none of the above. All right, here's the poll. Choose your answer. All right. I'll give it another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Young, what do our audience say? That is exactly right. None of the above. And in fact, you should be alarmed if they're asking you for these types of questions during the US Census. So at least we have a couple ahas, right? In terms of what the US Census can or can't ask, as well as the citizenship question. All right, next. You guys getting warmed up yet? All right. June 9th of 2020, since its official launch on March 19th, Stop AAPI Hate, the leading aggregator of incidents against Asian Americans during the pandemic, reports that we have reached nearly 1,900 incidences of anti-Asian discrimination documented across the US. This number covers an 8-week period of reporting. So based on the data, women report incidences of harassment. How many times, not percentage, how many more times in comparison to AAPI men? 1 time, 2 times, 3 times? What do you think? All right, we have 12, 10, 9, 10. Any other thoughts? 12, too many, that's for sure. That's a good answer, Katie. All right, it is 2.4 times. So this includes also, when you think about the elderly as well, the elderly are reporting 7.8% of the time in the survey. So it's the elderly, it's women, it's the most vulnerable. They even have example of kids being harassed in terms of from AAPI hate. And this survey, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, comes from the APCON and also CAA. They are actually publishing this data on a bi-weekly basis. So actually this is on some of the information that I will provide to you as part of the resource. So that'll be at the end of the session, but this is not acceptable, right? This is not something that we want to happen. So this is, again, for you to be aware of. All right, the last question. All right. Many of the more than 1.9 million AAPI-owned enterprises are small sole proprietorships that need assistance to access available resources such as business development, counseling, small business loans, and government procurement opportunities. There are how many million minority-owned firms, which is, by the way, an increase of 0.38% since 2007. How many million do you think we have in terms of minority-owned firms? 1.1. Okay, Anna, little higher than that. Actually, a lot higher. 3. Audrey, higher than that. 5. 20. Okay, lower. Carrie, you went just all out. 20 million. Lower than that, but higher than 5. Yes. Alice, you. Okay. Are you cheating, Alice? You're on the panel. Who's the panelist? Alice, you're right. Our intern, 8 million is correct. So I hope you learned a few things about kind of the aggregate view of what's going on from the AAPI community. And I also want to thank all of the resources that I pulled this information from the US Census, which is very, very important. The White House Initiative for AAPIs, there's data that I pulled from there, as well as the CAANHPI and others. So I appreciate the data. I think this is very important to understand kind of the aggregate view of our community. So with that, I'm going to turn back over to all of you who, I think it's Young.
It's me, Sue-Ann. I'm back.
All right, back to Liz.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you so much for that activity. It's always really good to see those numbers and to understand like what our community looks like and who's in our community. So I'm not going to be with you guys long. I want to introduce Samantha Chu, who is going to be our moderator for the night. She will be leading the discussion and the Q&A. Samantha is a lead scientist in Washington, D.C., specializing in quantitative survey research and data collection in hard-to-reach populations. Samantha is a subject matter expert on the gender gap, and original projects include the Gender Research Initiative, Women in Muslim Countries Projects, Coding with Girls, Women Who Code, and Accra, Ghana, and an impact program with women in statistics and data science. So Samantha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and we'll be moderating and introducing our lovely speakers. Over a week ago, before we begin, over a week ago when we started this, it sounded like we all really, the panelists had a good message and a theme and wanted to talk about identity and being comfortable in your truth. And so as I introduce the panelists, I'll also pause and give them a chance at the end to talk about how they see themselves and define the truth that they're living. I think the hope by moving through the different questions in the panel discussions is also to leave the audience here with actionable items and to learn how to enact change with themselves as well as within their communities for facing the challenges as Asian Americans going forward and building their own leadership. So today on our panelist views, and I'll ask for them to all open up their cameras now, we have Sandy Hua Deng. She's a social entrepreneurial and education expert. She's a leadership trainer and a management consultant. We have Sherry Daniels, Executive Director of the Papa Ola Lokai, Sue-Ann Hong, President and CEO of CAPAW, as well as Ben Day Guzman, Director of the Mayor's Office in Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs. And I'd like to really point out the diversity with this panel that's come together this evening. Sandy, we've got a representative and liaison bringing that bridge to our government counterparts. Sue-Ann, who's bringing in this corporate perspective, talking about private industry. Sherry, who's focusing on health, and we'll talk about social and cultural dynamics, as well as Ben, who's looking in on that policy directive or policy direction. So I think that diversity in the panel really will help answer questions about how they've become comfortable with their own identity and help create actions for change. So before we move over to our warm-up question, I want to pass it over to the panelists and talk about where we left off last week, which was how do you see yourself and your truth and living this truth as an Asian American and facing and creating actionable items for your community. Why don't we start off with Ben on this one?
So thank you. First of all, let me say, as an ally, as a cisgender male, you know, it's particularly, I want to say it's an honor for me to be on this panel, you know, to be invited to a space like this. I want to be mindful of what that means. So, but that said, I think, you know, for me,
All right, I think we might be frozen on Ben. I'm going to pass it over to Sue-Ann to talk more about from her perspective and her philosophy when joining our panel today.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I'm honored to be on this group of amazing panelists. And I think part of what I bring to the table from a self-identity perspective is being an AAPI female, but also someone who is bringing in that corporate perspective, somebody who is, I worked in corporate for 28 and a half years, and then I moved into nonprofit 2 years ago. So I'm relatively new in the nonprofit world and space. So I think from that aspect, what are things that I have to do to shift? What are things that I do to support the AAPI women, which is a completely different focus in terms of just more of a focus than what I did in corporate space, in terms of that, you know, more of that customer service perspective. But I do identify myself as an AAPI woman first. Then I also think about, you know, my community and kind of where I fit in that community, which I've had to continually look and actually reevaluate. So I'll just leave it there for now, and we'll get into it more further.
Thank you, Sue-Ann. Ben, I hope we have you back, and as your video starts to come in, I'll pass it over to Sandy first.
Okay.
Any welcoming notes?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today, and I'm so glad to be part of this panel. I actually was a refugee, came to this country when I was 13 years old. And because of my experience, I founded a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. in 1995 and started the first Asian American youth development organization in Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So I think that for me, using my own personal experience, background, history, and able to work with diverse group of people, working with Asian American, Asian Pacific Americans, and working with the Latino as well as African American community and the mainstream community to build, to help young people. So for me, and the identity is continues to evolve and continue to develop. But I'm very proud to be considered Asian American and being part of this wonderful community. So that's my remark for now.
Thank you, Sandy. And why don't we pass it back over to Ben? It looks like we've got you back.
Hey, sorry about that. No, I think that I just feel like I've moved between a lot of different worlds over the years. So already entering this space as an ally, I think there's already kind of an element of kind of care that I want to bring to tonight's discussion, but also moving between, you know, policy worlds and local as opposed to federal advocacy, you know, and just thinking about myself as kind of an openly gay person, and always having to think about these ideas of gender and gender identity. So I feel like those are the kinds of issues that I think about as I move through the world, but are bringing forward more directly to tonight's conversation. But thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Ben. And Sherry?
Well, Velina Mai Kako, I'm Sherry Daniels. I'm the Executive Director of Papa'ola Lokahi, which is the Native Hawaiian Health Board. And it is a true privilege and honor to be here, not only for the voice that I bring forward for our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, but also as a Native Hawaiian woman and bringing in the voice of my kupuna, my my grandmother, my tutu, my makua, my mother, and also to set the pathway for the next generations of girls, my daughters, my granddaughters, nieces. And I think it's really important as a Hawaiian woman, but also as a Pacific Islander, that we have a voice. We have so much struggles that we have to navigate. And I think all of us do as AANHPIs, is that we navigate a world that doesn't always fit in the construct that our community is, the reality of our community. And so I think having these conversations and having tonight's webinar is an opportunity for us to do that. And I'm very appreciative of the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And I do want to also, bring it out to our audience here this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. We do have a discussion planned for the audience this evening. Feel free to put any of the questions you have in the chat, and I'll either call over or read on your behalf, but don't hesitate to ask the hard questions this evening. We are here today to really have a meaningful discussion, and I don't think that there's anything that will be uncomfortable or difficult. And it will lead to a more meaningful discussion. So thank you very much, everybody. So a quick warm-up question this evening. This year, AANHPI women have made waves in our presidential primaries, including the candidacies of Senator Kamala Harris and Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. And currently, 42% of AANHPI House of Representatives are women. That's 6 women and 8 men, and 100% of AANHPI in the Senate are women. 3 women, Mazi Hirono of Hawaii, Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, Kamala Harris of California. So what does this evolving representation in public service mean for AANHPI women? So pausing there, giving everyone a moment to think about it, I think I'd like to turn it first over to Sandy, who's had experience as a liaison between government representatives. Sandy, how does this evolving representation in public service mean for yourself and perhaps for other AANHPI women?
Well, I think that it has been a big step because many of us want to see Asian and Pacific American in public service. And so for me, when I was appointed by President Obama to serve on the Vietnam Education Foundation, I was very honored because for me, AAPI had contributed a lot to this country. And the fact that now we are getting more representation in Congress, in other public agency is a plus. And for me, when I was able to represent the United States and going back to my birth country, which is Vietnam, and be able to represent the United States and as a woman, and I feel very proud of being a Vietnamese American and Asian American. And also the fact that when I go to Vietnam, there's many young women who feel that, wow, if I can do it, other people can do it too. So the fact that we have many senators and we have representation from our community, I think that encouraged a lot more AAPI young people to have aspiration, inspire them to basically run for Congress, run for local office, run for presidents. I think is wonderful.
Thank you, Sandy. So I'd like to turn this over then to Sue Ann to provide another perspective from the corporate and private sector, right? So does this evolving representation in public service translate in the same sense of representation and being proud, as Sandy was saying, in your experience in the corporate and private sector?
So one of the things the very first thing that came to my mind when you asked this question was being seen. So one of the things that I think about from an AAPI perspective and women and AANHPI overall is the fact that sometimes we feel invisible. And so when you're one of few and you don't see the representation, then that is very difficult to influence, and so when we get more representation, when we get more you know, whether it's African American females or Asian American females, Latinx, when we get more representation, the diversity of thought increases. There is data that actually says, you know, if you have more diversity in your workplace, you actually will increase your bottom line. So from a corporate aspect, it's in our best interest. But at the same time, our issues and the things that are important to our community is brought about. And I think that is becomes seen. And so I think when I think about it from a corporate perspective, I think that's huge. So from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, and also from a results perspective, from the economic side of it, and as well as mentoring, as well as helping others along the way. You know, what are you doing, not just as you're elevating and all of these women, you know, what are you doing to help others, other young people of color come along and to help them break that cultural barrier to succeed? So that's what I think about when you ask that question.
Thank you, Sue-Ann. So Ben, I'm going to turn it to you with a challenging question here. You know, your experience with policy and working with as an advocate in the MOA, PIA experience, you know, sometimes institutions and policy can hinder that level of representation. So in your experience, does representation lead to policy change, or does policy change, has that led to more representation, and any sort of challenges you've seen from your experience?
Well, I think what's important to consider here in terms of the relationship between representation and maybe we can call it policy outcomes, right, is intentionality, right? Like, I think it's very important that Kamala Harris and Mazie Hirono, you know, have been on the main stage and, you know, that sort of thing. And it's important that they center who they are as well, right? Like Mazie has been unapologetic about being an immigrant, right? She talks about her joke, her meme was, you know, I'm an immigrant, I'm a woman, and I'm a person of color, you know, in the Senate. Are you gay? No, well, you know, 3 out of 4 ain't bad, right? But I think it also means that she talks about those perspectives and she's intentional about it when she talks about policy, right? So being the only immigrant in the Senate is made even more meaningful when she talks about immigration policy, right? So, you know, I think that matters. And I guess the only other thing I want to say, and we'll talk about kind of leadership and some of the other things that folks have already mentioned in terms of mentorship and that sort of thing. But one of the things that I've always been appreciative of has been the idea of possibility models instead of role models. And I think, at the risk of claiming credit for the LGBT community, I feel like Laverne Cox was the first person I saw who put this in the zeitgeist. Like, you know, it's not about being, you know, modeling yourself after a particular someone, but letting them show you what's possible, right? So, you know, it's not saying anything different than what has been said before me, but maybe just reframing it in a different way. But I think it's important. It's kind of shifted how I've thought about these kinds of questions.
Thank you, Ben. So Sherry, I'm going to kick off the second question with you today. So how has the Me Too movement influenced your career as a woman in public service? And then how do you think it affects women in the workplace? And I think this is a great question for you because I can see from your past that you really do straddle both those spheres.
Thank you. I think, you know, I don't think the Me Too movement or any other movement that we're seeing is new in the sense that I think for our communities, we've seen a lot of these types of issues raised. I think many of our communities, these issues were kind of kept on the side. Our families oftentimes didn't talk about things. We didn't bring it out. We didn't, you know, expose it to the sunlight. And I think part of it was the way we interacted in our communities, within our culture. but as time has gone on, it has become more acceptable, more needed for us to put those things out there. I do believe our communities are much more resilient in being able to work through those issues, that we don't necessarily see them as, you know, they're bad, they're horrible. It's there. How do we change the direction in which we move? How do we come together as community? How do we address this in a way that's that uplifts us? And I think we tend to, in our societal thinking, that there has to be bad, so we got to make it good. Where maybe it's about changing the framework, like Dan talked about, that we accept things that have gone on, we accept the things that have happened throughout all of our histories, right? Whether you're an AA community, our NH community, our PI communities, whether you're from Samoa or Hawaii, we all have trauma. We all have historical trauma in our past. Sometimes personally, sometimes just as a community. And I think how we move through things like the Me Too movement, how we find our voice, how we stand in our truth, is really indicative of our community's resiliency. And I think that's what makes us powerful as AANHPIs, is we forget sometimes that we've been through a lot, whether it's coming from another country as a refugee, whether it's dealing with issues related to our LGBTQ communities. All of those things all play into how we see ourselves in our community, and taking ownership of that. I think especially as a Native Hawaiian, we're very mindful of our history and where we are. And it's never about our own individual gain. It's how is the things that I'm doing going to benefit my community, my lahui, right? And so it's never about that silo individual person. It's what am I doing that's going to have the impact? I don't need to have recognition at the end of the day, but my community needs to be uplifted. And I think that's where maybe we need to reframe some of those movements. And I think it's easy for us to just kind of go, oh my gosh, yes, yes, versus, okay, how do we move forward from this? That's really that is the gem in it.
Sherry, I want to thank you and pull on a thread you mentioned. You know, what is the Me Too movement today? Is it new? What's the level of resilience in it? And I want to pass this over to Sandy to comment on how the Me Too movement has influenced her career as well as in the workplace. But I also want to push it out to all the attendees this evening. And if you want in the chat box, I'd love to, and I think all the panelists would love to hear from you. You know, what does the Me Too movement mean to you? So as we hear, you know, Sandy kind of comment, I'd love to read some of your comments out loud and have that spark conversation as well. So feel free to write in on how you define the Me Too movement and how that works in your sphere as well. So Sandy?
Yes. So, you know, when you talk about the Me Too movement, I remember early in my career when I was 20 something, and I was the project directors. And I was interviewing a man for a position as a teacher for my summer school program in Washington, D.C. And he came in and, you know, we were interviewing, and then he commented on me and he said, how is a pretty woman like you end up to be in this position? And I'm thinking, that doesn't sound right. You know, it doesn't sound like, you know, and I'm in a position of authority to hire him and he's making this comment, right? So I'm thinking, this is very interesting. And that reminded me of how, you know, being a woman and being a position of authority and still having people who come up to you and say, how do you get here? You know, like, you don't deserve to be here. And I think that for me, my career had been, how can I find myself to hold on to my authority and to be able to tell him that, no, I get here because of who I am, of, you know, I work hard and I just like anyone else, right? Able to accomplish. But I think that had made me think about how I, as a woman, and how we had to work so hard, even when I was moving through my career into position as political appointees. And still I had to prove myself all over again, right? There's men who question my competency, my passions, and all of that. So I think that for me, is to be able to hold on to your own sense of agency and hold on to your own passions and say that you deserve to be here. You deserve to have a seat at the table. You deserve to work hard and get where you are. So that's why I think it's very important, and not to be shy away from the different things that happen. Like Cher was saying, you know, the Me Too movement going to continue to happen, and you know, men are going to continue to question our ability and depend on the color of our skin and where we are. So even though I work in nonprofit, I work in consultant management, I work in leadership training. I remember walking to a charter school and people look at me and say, you don't look like the kind of consultants that we have in mind, you know, because you're an Asian American woman, you know, it doesn't fit into this consulting that we had in mind. So there's so many times that I have that happen to me, but I just had to hold my head up high and do the work and deliver results. That's how I get through it.
Thank you, Sandy. Sue Ann, Ben, do you have any comments on the Me Too movement? And I think I'd like to focus then, though, you know, the stories from Sherry and Sandy are great examples of, you know, where we've come from, but how then does this next generation, how do we translate that into more change and helps like set up for more actionable items? You know, I feel the strength coming from Sandy, and I also want to know, and how do we create that into action for the future?
Sue, you want to go?
So, you know, it's interesting. This brought up a lot of thoughts for me because I've had some very, when I worked at State Farm, I was in auto claims, kind of a very male dominated space. And as I think about the things that I've had to do and standing up for myself, I don't think that's any different then than now. The only difference is now you can get more help. And I think, so here's an example, you know, when I think about, because I saw Liz's question here about, can you know, separate sexism and, you know, and I'm going to put bullying in there too, by the way. I would put that in there as well, along with some of the other pieces, but you can't separate all that at the time when, you know, you have to stand up for yourself because you are in a space potentially that is male dominated. There has to be some internal courage you have to muster. I had to muster up internal courage to address individuals, and I don't think that's any different today. I think you have to muster up courage individually to be able to not only address the person, or if you have to report it, to deal with, you know, the fear of repercussion, the shame that can go with it. I think there's a lot of emotional things that you have to go through in order to then address that piece. And I can tell you at the time, I was probably in my 30s when I first encountered it, and I was in like mid-level leader. And I think I need the same courage today in order to report something like that, or to be able to address the person. And by the way, I did. 3 people, 3 white males simultaneously. They were all friends. They were all peers. They were all my peers, but they treated me with such, I would call it bullying, and only female, Asian female in an auto claims industry. And I had to push each one of them back. One actually physically stepped into my space and started addressing me. I had to step into their space and actually put them in their place of what they're saying to me and how they were saying it. I don't know if I would handle that any differently today. So sometimes you gotta just and then I felt, you know, when I got home, then I fell on my bed and had a good cry, and, you know, called my friends and my family and really try to get some, you know, support. But I don't know if I would do that any differently today.
Sue Ann, I think, you know, I'm starting to hear a real trend that started with Sherry earlier when she says the Me Too movement is not new, you know, and the solutions that Sandy, Sue Ann, you guys have brought up are not also new either. And when I look at some in the chat window, you know, we have Me Too has given me more confidence to push back when my harassers gaslight me. So, you know, I think having the courage and having the confidence in recognizing the Me Too movement, realizing that's not new, and finding sources for resilience is exactly right.
I do want to make a comment that I think, you know, with a lot of these things that are happening, it's creating the empowerment for our next generation to speak their truth, find their voice that maybe the older generations didn't. But also, you know, when I think about the question about older generations putting your head down and how do we do that, you know, and I think about in Hawaii, right? We're very romanticized, almost in an exotic kind of way, that women, you know, sway their hips and do all these things, and it's this very exotic place. And so I think there's also those pieces that get inserted around things like that, that just kind of perpetuates the thinking of what, for example, a Hawaiian woman or a Pacific Islander woman is, right? And people get a very false sense of reality of what that is.
I think I want to, I'm mindful of kind of how I'm contributing to this conversation, but I think I want to remind, I don't want to say remind, I want to remember that the kind of original hashtag moment of Me Too in its most recent iteration came about through women talking about very difficult things, right? So sexual abuse, like, you know, men who had buttons on their desks that would allow them to lock the doors, right? Like these very serious and grave issues. And, you know, I think things that initially seemed very cut and dry, and now it was a moment of reckoning, right? Like the phrase "a moment of reckoning" was there. And I think that we're still at this moment of trying to figure out what it all means. Like, it's not clear to me that we've just turned on a light switch and now we're in this new moment, right? Like, you know, as we pass it on to the next generation, I think we're gonna do things, you know, we're gonna make decisions, we're gonna make policy related decisions based on the feelings that we have right now, that people will look back on us and say, well, maybe they got it wrong, or I don't know. It's just, I don't want to say this in a way that I think that this change has been for the good, in the sense that women have not been believed, right? Like it's been very difficult for women to have these kinds of discussions and to bring these things forward. And it's so encouraging to see or to hear about women saying that this moment has allowed them to come forward, you know, in ways that I haven't had to think about. You know, have I had a history of unwanted sexual advancements? Yes. You know, but have I not had to think about it in the same way that a woman has? I feel like that's probably true also. You know, like I've been able to take safety in a different, think about my safety and my personal safety in a different way than my women friends and colleagues. So I also feel like we're in this moment of negotiation where, you know, it's important for us to stick to our values, to make sure that the change that we're fighting for doesn't backslide or kind of get reframed in a different way, and that we continue to create the space where people will continue to feel even more confident in coming forward to tell their truth.
Ben, you know, you mentioned a moment of negotiation, right? To make sure this change doesn't backslide. And I'm looking in the webinar chat, and folks are asking for, you know, answers, right? How do we integrate men? How do we change the institution to be able to set policies and guidelines to help facilitate less abuse or less discrimination in the workplace? And so I think I would like to move on to our third question today, because I can see where talking about salary disparities ethnically, racially, as well as from a gender perspective, is a good symbolism for the institution that might be perpetuating these sorts of divisions. So, I'll read this question to you, and I think it would be great if you could kick us off on this institutional perspective. So Asian American women are paid 90 cents for every dollar paid to white, non-Hispanic men, and for other AANHPI groups, and the disparity is worse with that. For Nepalese women, it's 50 cents for every dollar. For Burmese women, we have 52 cents for every dollar. And so how do you think these disparities impact the community? And what are some of the practices that an employer or an employee can take to change this institutional difference? Do you have any recommendations or ideas that could help change it from this perspective?
Yeah, at the risk of starting with a silly example, one of the things that I've done a lot of kind of watching old movies during this kind of pandemic moment, like seeing whether things have held up or not held up. And one of the early movies that I watched like in March was 9 to 5. And maybe it's an older movie, so I see Sherry laughing. If you haven't seen it, no matter how old you are, I actually feel like I want to recommend it to you. I feel like it's held up. I'm talking to people who might have very different observations, but it was a movie and has inspired a national nonprofit that has continued to think about women's roles in the workplace, right? But the changes that they talked about were sort of pie in the sky back then, right? Like shared workspace, like, working flex time, having daycare on your office site, and these are things that are not uncommon now, right? And so I think that I feel like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can think about. And actually another result of this pandemic moment, I think, has been to allow us to think differently about telework. So even telework is an opportunity to equalize a playing field and give people different opportunities to balance home life and work life. Hopefully that has a positive angle. So I think that things like, pay equity, I think need to be important. Seeing like even things like job lists that require you to post the salary, paying interns. When I started, it was, you were lucky if you were able to get paid as an intern, and now it's increasingly part of the conversation. I will give one hot take. I feel a kind of complex way about salary negotiation. That's been discussed as a way to, preventing salary negotiation and recognizing that there are gendered and racialized inequities about salary negotiation processes. And I feel like salary negotiation is a tool that people should be able to have access to, even though we currently have inequities. So I'm not convinced. I'm still having sort of old-timey feelings about salary negotiation policies. But I think that a lot of these issues that are being talked about in the policy arena, in the work policy arena, are to the good. But again, I think it's helpful that we're talking about them specifically and intentionally through a gendered lens, right? Like, what are the disparities of how women and men face these things differently,
Bennett, what I hear too is that you're talking a lot about education, right? And I think even for the audience here, knowing about the pay disparities and the way that policies and institutions might have hindered that sort of future equality, the education perspective is very important. So Sandy, thinking about this question for you then, and thinking about practices from an employer or employee to address pay gaps, and how can the future community, how can we educate ourselves? And I know you have experience as an entrepreneur and working with the Vietnam Education Foundation. How do we find the tools to educate ourselves to help close this gap in income inequality or other racial disparities that we may not realize that we're facing in the workplace?
Yeah, I think more and more. I think that when I was working as exec director of a nonprofit that I founded, Asian American Lead, a lot of young people who came and when I hired them, we give we post a salary or we negotiate a salary, and a lot of young people had done a lot of homework, and they came in. They said, this is how much the people are getting paid in general. This is we would like to get us paid this much. So I think that they've done a lot of homework, which very impressive, right? I think that like not a lot of nonprofit, we don't have a lot of resources. I mean, I like to pay people a decent wages, decent salary, but I think that a lot of time, because of the limited resources, we could not, have the standard that. But I think that now with more education, understanding the market out there, people doing homework and expect to get paid equally. And I think the more awareness people have about this, they walk into a workplace, and like Ben said, it is hard to negotiate salary. I know that. I actually had to take a negotiation class at MIT in order to think. I asked my professor, his name is Larry Susskind, and I said, well, how do you negotiate salary? Because as an Asian American woman, I'm really hesitant about negotiating salary. And he said, well, you know what? You need to do your homework, and you also had to come prepared. You had to come prepared that you had to come with a whole compensation package, and not just the number, right? Not just the salary, but all the other things that come with it. So I mean, I learned a big lessons, right? So for me, it's important. It's important to say, what is my bargaining chip, right? This is what is it that I can offer? But remember that we need to be able to offer a lot of things first, and also maybe say, 3 months from now, maybe we reevaluate whether, or 6 months from now, to reevaluate whether the salary, to prove yourself first, right? So I think that for me, by knowing more, learning negotiation skill, learning how to negotiate is very, very important. And also learning how to prove yourself that you are worth that much money, or worth the compensation package. So for me, that's really important. And I think the earliest you learn, the better, because I don't think negotiation salary is easy for at least most people that I know, that I talk to. So I think that for young people to learn this skill, I think this is essential.
Sandy, I think that's also the perfect segue to the next question, right? You're talking about having these skills, being empowered, proving to yourself and the others that you deserve the compensation package you have. And I think right now we realize that most people are aware that this glass ceiling is being reached. And so, I want to turn the next question to Sue-Ann, who I think her experience will really be able to come into play to this. Most people, Sue-Ann, are very well aware that there is a glass ceiling for women. And based on your experience, you have definitely shattered it and helped shatter it. But I think you offer a unique perspective in that there's also what is known as a bamboo ceiling for Asian Americans, right? And so as an Asian American woman, thinking about what Sandy was saying with having the right tools to negotiate and break that glass ceiling, I think, we'd love to hear from you how you faced any sort of challenges. Like, what did that ceiling look like? Have you noticed or felt that there was a ceiling there? Is there a difference between the glass ceiling or a bamboo ceiling? And I'd love to hear about what the skills and the tools that you had, or the education you brought to help break both the glass and bamboo ceiling.
It's a very big question and a very relevant one. So I'm going to talk from a couple different perspectives. One is that from a corporate perspective, having led like a department, if you bring in 40 people and they're all first line leaders, they all have the same equipment, they all have the same information, but for some reason, this group over here, this 2 or 3 or 5, they start elevating. So you wonder, what is it that they're doing differently than the rest of the group, and what causes them to elevate? Number one is, what I notice is that these individuals many times have some type of a way to identify, they're looking all at the same data, they're all looking at the same information, but their ability to take that information and to be able to turn that into something that could help not just their teams, but from a broader perspective. And their supervisor is very supportive of them. So their immediate supervisor is very supportive of these individuals. From an AAPI perspective, I don't always see that. I did not always see that happening. And from my personal experience, the reason what helped me the most is I think because one of the executives who happened to be Caucasian vice president, he saw something that in me and my talent. So he helped me and sponsored me to help break through some of that, if you want to call it glass ceiling, bamboo ceiling, where others did not necessarily see that potential in me. I had periods in my career where I had that support, and then I had periods in my career where I didn't have it. And you can definitely see the difference. But somehow they see and believe in you of the potential, not just what you're doing right now, but the potential of what you bring to the table. And then when that person knowingly and verbally and outwardly supports you, that breaks the door open for you to get other opportunities, whether it's a promotion or other maybe developmental opportunities. Second thing, Working Mother Research did a study. They actually looked at multicultural women and what was the difference between what they received at the beginning of their career versus men, Caucasian men. And one of the key things that we found was two different messaging when they enter into the organization. One being, hey, you need to get specific career advice as a male. You get specific guidance. You get specific information about career progression and career counseling. Women, when they entered in, they don't get the same networking. They don't get the same advice. And a key piece we found was these women were not coached to be in profit and loss area. So what happens is they go along through their career, they're in learning and development, human resources, and these other general departments, and then they hit a ceiling because they don't have experience in profit and loss where the revenue is generated. So that's something to think about from a perspective of career management. So I'll share those couple of things.
So, and I think you mentioned something here. It's really about mentors, right? About how you build your team and seek out above and below your position to understand and gain resources to educate yourself and succeed. And I know a common question we get from our CAPAL audience is, how do you find mentors? And is it okay to find a male mentor? Is it better to find a female mentor, someone closer in age, older, younger? It's a difficult process, and I think one really based on an issue of trust. So how do we find the right mentor, and how do we trust the advice that we're given?
So I can talk about my experience, which is number one, there has to be some type of what are you trying to do? Do you understand what are you trying to at least accomplish? What are your goals? Where are you trying to go? And there should be some type of an assessment of some sort to say, I am great at these things. These are my strengths. And these are areas that I need to work on, right? Is there a mentor? Are there some key critical skill sets that I need where a mentor could be helpful? And to be able to maybe approach someone or have my supervisor help me find someone. By the way, to me, that always worked better for me, is if I really wanted a mentor, especially if I didn't know them, to leverage my immediate supervisor and to be able to talk through what that plan looked like and why that would be great for development in both ways. And I would then request that, but I'd have a plan together. I'm not going to go to my supervisor with just no idea what I want to do and just say I want a mentor. I have a plan. At least this is what I think, and then get their feedback. So being proactive is very important. There's a conversation also that I think there's an art to the conversation of how you ask for one. That's a whole another topic, but there is a way to communicate in a way that doesn't make it sound like it's all about you. And the fact that you're seeking a mentor that's just about your development. But there is an art to approaching that topic. And so I think that's another piece, is the way you communicate, how you come across. how you do that with someone so that they're like, oh, okay, so I see that this could be a very interesting conversation and learning for me too as the mentor. So I think that's another thing, is the art of asking for what you want.
Sherry, I'd love to turn it over to you. You know, what's your experience with finding mentors and advice for an audience? Do you agree or disagree with Sue-Ann?
I definitely agree. I think, finding mentors is, I think people think once you find a mentor, that's going to be the silver bullet to life, right? You're going to excel in the things you do. Things are all going to make sense. And the reality is you could go through a handful of mentors. You could be later in your career and still need mentors. I mean, I think somehow we have this belief that mentors are for this particular reason. And, being in the field as long as I have, I would say some of the people I've worked with, some of my staff, I consider them mentors for me, because we get very complacent sometimes in the work we do and the things we do because we just are doing. And when something happens, we take offense, like, oh, I didn't expect that, and how could they, and why did they do that? And it's, I think sometimes as folks in the, I guess, perceived higher position, we also got to recognize that we constantly learn and we need mentors too, because we consistently evolve. We're constantly changing, both as a person and as a professional. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we forget that. One of the things I also recognize really strongly is that we have to almost be fluid in the things that we do. And I'm just speaking from the voice of a Native Hawaiian woman, that how I behave or how my engagement with my community is here in Hawaii is going to look different than what the perception or how I engage with Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders on the continent. It's not that one is better than the other, but I have to be respectful that that's just the way, that's how we engage. It's not a right or wrong. You have to be very mindful of your place. I think sometimes we think that we've reached some pinnacle in our careers, that it's all good, and it's not. We have to constantly remember that we got to check ourselves. And it's not that we acquiesce to what's happening around us. No, we have to know what our truth is, who we are as a woman, as a Native Hawaiian, as right, as a mom, as a sister, as a cousin. All of those ases that we have make up who we are. And for us to recognize that and empower that is very important. Somebody once told me the greatest gift you can have is just to listen. I think we spend so much time talking that we stop listening, and really listening not to the movement around us, but listening to our inside. And that's what that person meant when she told me that. It wasn't about the space and air that's around me. It's what am I hearing in me? What's my gut telling me? We so often go with our head because that's what we have to do to reach some kind of status, right? We talk about the salary, and which is very important. It's about creating livable wages, right? It's about equitable, livable wages, but it's more than that. It's how do people continue to have passion in the work that they do? How do we have conversations with people when we see that they're stagnant? Not that they're not doing the work, but where's that passion? Because that's what our community see. That is what engages our community. When you start, drifting off on the passion, I think it's really important to look at what does that mean. Money doesn't always equate to that, right? And I think sometimes we think to fit into the Western concepts of what is success, we have to have these things. And personally, sure, it will provide a lot of stuff and a lot of things, but I don't know if it really provides fulfillment in the work that you need to do but really what you bring to your community. Because I think we, at least for myself, your community looks to you. You know, your community looks to you to help drive, to help lay the pathway, to help uplift others. And so I think that's really important to not forget that in this craziness of it, that you somehow gotta carve out time for yourself to keep yourself in check. And I think as leaders, that's the hardest thing to do, is to actually do the things you tell your mentees or your staff to do, right? That's probably the lesson in all of this. And so that's just my mana'o, my 2 cents on kind of this.
If I can add something, I think that Sherry is definitely, I second you on the fact that, you know, no matter when in your career, you still need mentor. I'm so lucky I still have mentors. I also think that it's very important that, you know, I think the mentoring relationship is like you wanna contribute, you wanna learn, right? And so actually some people who are working with now, they don't call it mentor, but they teach me a lot and they're younger than me. So, you know, I was very happy that I'm able to, because, you know, these days with technology, I feel like a dinosaur, you know, so I think that having other people who can teach me things is wonderful. Another thing I think that Sherry, you mentioned that, you know, we have to keep ourselves learning, keep ourselves passion, right? And also keep reflection is another thing that you talk about that is really important. I just want to add one more thing is that a lot of time I have young people come to me and ask me to do certain thing for them. And I think they forget to thank people. It's not that I needed the thanks, but I think that it's important to show appreciation. It's important if you are asking for a mentor, make sure you thank your mentor. Make sure you find opportunity to show that you appreciate, because you know everyone have busy life these days, and the fact that your mentor take out time to help you and to really look out for you is important for you to appreciate, right? And to be say, you know, I know how busy you are, and be very conscientious of their time, because that is going to keep, like you said, you know, having a mentor doesn't mean having a silver bullet that it will solve things. It's the fact that you want to continue to show, and your relationship, like some of my mentors in my early career are my lifelong friends. That because I keep up the relationship, right? That because I nurture the relationship. So those are things that are very, very important. And you don't have to have one mentor. You can have as many mentors as you want, but make sure that you build a relationship, right? And you want to continue to do that. I think that's very important.
I think go ahead, Ben. Or
Oh, sorry. I wanted to kind of take off from Sandy's point to talk about networking, because I feel like these issues around mentorship and networking are often talked about in the same breath, but aren't always perceived that way. You know, like sometimes networking comes across as something very transactional, like, oh, you know, you have to go network, and you know, there's this, you know, like boys club that's in the back smoke-filled room making all these decisions and what have you, and you know, and networking workshops or whatever. I always thought those were distasteful to me, you know, but one of the most helpful things that I kind of have learned over the years is when you begin to think about these things not as transactional, but as relational, you know, it's not about making transactions that will move you forward, right? And I think other people have said this in a different way, but you know, it's about building a relationship with people who have common interests, right? So you build a connection to someone who is also interested in public service, right? And as someone who may be further along than you in the career ladder, like maybe they can help you answer some questions about what it will look like for you to move forward. Or like Sandy and Sherry have both said, right? Like, you know, you can learn from people that are younger than you, right? Or maybe they can remind you about their passion, about why you started this work in the first place, right? Like, what was it like for you when you were 20 years younger and, you know, just beginning to start this work? But I think that it's important to think about it that way, because, you go to these things sometimes, because actually, and this is a really weird thing to talk about in this context, because usually these CAPAL sessions, you all pile into a room and everyone talks about DC so important because it's such a networking city. And, I haven't, found a job that I haven't already known through networking in like 10 years or whatever. But like the fact that we're doing all of this through Zoom now, I don't know what this is going to look like for you all as participants, like 10 years down the road. Normally the relationships that sometimes people make at CAPAL will last them their lives, like sometimes they meet their friends that they'll support each other throughout their careers. But, I think that it's important to make relationships. That's like, policy is made by people, right? So the more successful you are in moving people, the more successful you will be in moving policy.
And I like that very much. Policy is made by people, and each people, we have to have our identity, as Sherry and Sandy were saying, and to figure out how to rotate that with mentors above and below into our network. We need to pause here real quick, and I'm gonna have you comment on something, Ben, with public service and how you've translated identity and community into your motivation for public service. I'll ask that question again, but I do want to remind the audience here that we will be shifting into an open question and answer in a couple minutes. So right now, I've got about 3 questions that are queued up and ready to go, but please do incorporate your questions that you'd like answered for the panel here in the chat box, and we'll shift over to that. So Ben, as we start to get in more questions here, back to you real quick. Like I said, you said policy is made by the people, right? And I like that, which means that you have to have a strong identity and network and a sense of service to be able to get there. So, I'd love to hear more about how you've defined your identity and how that's translated into public service, and any advice you have for the audience on how we can strengthen our own identity and our networks to, foster a more public service or just service back to our own communities.
Yeah, I feel like I came to this work, I came to DC not as a political animal, right? Like I had very little sense of what party politics were. I was woefully uninformed for someone as old as I was at the time, even for someone with a college education or whatever. But what I did have was an idea that I wanted to be part of a national dialogue about something. I had a sense of the change that I wanted to see in the world. And maybe because I had spent years on a campus, like doing advocacy that way, I didn't see like policy and politics as a way to achieve those goals, right? But I don't know, you sort of find a job, you get yourself on a career ladder, you end up at a civil rights nonprofit. The next thing you know, like you're seeing the nexus between politics and policy and public service. And I feel like those 3 things have always interconnected for me. But always at the core was public service. It wasn't like I was doing this for the money, for those of us in the nonprofit sector.
Ben, you are feeding right into a brilliant start to our Q&A, and this is a tough question. So I might give you a moment to answer, see if anyone else has it. But this question, it's, how do you navigate public service when we're also swayed by lobbyists and legacy money?
Well, I saw that question too, right? So
yeah, we're
was
fighting for higher pay, we're fighting for more representation. So there's a lot of chance for bias to occur in the process. I think this is a great question. How do we navigate public service when we're also swayed by lobbyists and legacy money, and even our own agendas?
I mean,
Sherry,
everyone is being swayed by lobbyists and legacy money, right? Like even if your own motivations are not public service, right? Like I think about like the episode of West Wing or whatever TV show where, the person that you thought was your hero, it turns out that they've made these bad political decisions, ostensibly because they thought, oh, well, I can't be I can't do the right thing if I lose my re-election money, and if I lose my election bid, and I can't get reelected unless I make this money, unless I take this lobbyist money, right? And so they're seen as the bad guy, right? So as the bad person. And so to me, whether on some level, it's immaterial what your personal driver is, whether it is public service or whether it is your own bottom line, because unfortunately there are people that are out there that are like that. But you're always trying to sort of not be swayed by lobbyists, and you have to remain true to your own North Star. But I think for me and for a lot of us, you know, because we come from cultures, at the risk of overly, you know, shorthanding it, like we come from cultures where we're not supposed to recognize the individual necessarily, right? But their role in the public good. You know, it's about like you're bringing honor to the family or whatever. Again, at the risk of not sounding culturally, you know, just overly culturally nationalistic or whatever. But I think that maintaining your own North Star is really important. And hopefully that North Star is informed by public service and doing something beyond yourself. But it is important to remain true to that. And hopefully that will allow you to make the decisions that are not swayed by other people and their money or what have you.
Sherry, I'd love to pass it over to you if you have any questions or any comments on your North Star and not swaying to lobbies or legacy money, or perhaps reaching your own bottom line, as Ben says.
You know, I think from my own perspective, I'm okay in walking away. But that's my own perspective. I think what I've recognized over the years is when I put so much effort into making something work, right? I just bust my brain trying to figure out how to get fit into that cookie cutter box, right? And I'm working hard and I'm doing all this, and I look around and I'm like, what the heck? Once I was able to recognize that, not that you don't put in the work, not that you don't put in the effort, but that you're doing it because you want to, not for something you don't know or you're hoping to happen. You're doing it now for the betterment. I found it easy to walk away when things just didn't click or work out right. Not that I was totally washing my hands of it. I just said, maybe just isn't the right moment. This isn't the right intersection for it to happen. I think so often we think that, especially as women, that we have to keep going because that's the only way we're going to be recognized, and for folks to see the value that we bring to the table. Or culturally, right? If I'm in a community that I don't have anyone that looks like me, I'm going to try to adjust myself so that, one, I don't stand out, but two, I can kind of figure out what the cues are so that I don't get stuck. And I think that's the hard thing, is somehow when I've learned to, it's okay, I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to fit into a box. That if my intentions is to help our community, help the public, uplift, right? I keep using that word, but really to uplift, it's amazing. And I'm sure my staff will laugh at this, because there's been many times where I've wanted something so bad and I've like, no, we're going to hold back. We're going to step back and we're just going to let it play. And you know what? It actually worked out to our benefit in the end. Maybe not the next day or a week from then, but over time, that's stopping and just, it's okay. I don't have to manipulate and create those pieces because maybe it wasn't meant to be, right? And that's a hard place. That's a very difficult place to get to when you're trying to fit in, when you're trying to be a mover and shaker, when you're trying to push some initiatives of your community that have been stagnant for years. That's the hardest thing, is to wait. It's like Christmas time, right? You want to open your presents. If you see it there, you want to open it, but you can't. And I think that's probably my biggest advice I can give to people sometimes, is that if you're going to get swayed, you're going to get swayed. if you're gonna, if that's what is going to happen, that's what's going to happen regardless if people are doing that. But you got to stand up to your own truth, and it's okay to say, you know, I just don't feel comfortable about this, you know, and find those words. And I know it's easier said than done, but I think that's the hard thing, is to really see where you fit in the bigger spectrum of things, right? And I think somebody asked a question about traditional cultures, and how do we intersect, and how do we interact and behave in those ways. And even for us Native Hawaiians, we have folks that are very traditional in the protocol and the practices. And as a Native Hawaiian, if I'm not adept to those protocols, yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm not like the best Hawaiian out there, right? And I think a part of it is just being okay with that and not inserting myself, but looking around and learning and looking for others that I can gain that knowledge from. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sherry, and thank you for turning to this question, because I think it's great. You know, we are in a global work environment. We are forced to navigate these variances, and you know, Carrie, great word, right? There really is a lot of variance in the views of gender roles, and with Asian Americans on where we sit and interacting. And Carrie, you're right. You know, when interacting with individuals from Asian countries that may be more traditional and facing the Western workforce and the Western, you know, government systems, and there really is a lot of variance that we're forced to adapt to. So I want to push this question over to Sue-Ann and Sandy. You know, I think in your experiences managing really diverse communities and operations, and yourself being, you know, in a diverse situation as it may be a minority or having to lead from a new perspective, you know, how have you navigated this variance from a traditional perspective as well as maybe a modern one, if that's the other word for traditional?
Well, let me get a stab at it. I think that for me, you know, I told you I'm from Vietnam, and I work a lot in Vietnam as a executive director of Vietnam Education Foundation. And you know what I can tell you is that we need to not make assumptions. There's so much to learn. Like, I went to Vietnam, and it's very hard. I thought I knew. I speak Vietnamese. I still can read and write, but you know, I came across this one incident where one staff person was very upset at me because I asked for my reimbursement on the day of the death, like July 1st or something. And they were really upset because they said, this is a no-no in Vietnam, but I have no idea. I thought I knew, but you know, there's so much has changed. I've been away for 40 years. I mean, live in the US for 40 years, so I have no idea. And you know, it's so funny because a double-edged sword, because I'm Vietnamese American, they expect me to know, right? But the fact that I've been away and I'm really an American, so it's a very difficult thing, and you know, to be able to be humble and say, just assume that you don't know, and you learn as much as you can. Even that, you're gonna come across things that you're gonna offend people. And I think that, you know, you just have to apologize because you just don't know. So, you know, I had worked with many different communities and diversities and all of that. Is that it's an endless learning process. And there's so many, even within a community, a lot of time we make assumption that, oh, the Vietnamese American community. Well, within the Vietnamese community, there's so many factions, there's so many different that you can think of. And how to go into a community and not assume that, you know, they are the same, right? So I think that is a very important lesson. And sometimes because of our brain, you know, we need to process information. So our brain will rely on the stereotypes, because that's how we able to manage so much information, right? But the thing is that the world is changing so fast. And there's so many people, and we have to be a global community. So there's so much we don't know, and we just have to be a student all the time and learn and not to make assumptions. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm going to pass this to Sue-Ann, but Sue-Ann, I want to remind you, if you remember last week when we were chatting, you talked a little bit about assimilation. You know, so to pull on this thread of, you know, bridging this gap, sometimes we're forced to assimilate, right? Is it to assimilate to this new workforce and new community environment, or to assimilate back to your traditional, you know, being positive with who you are, as Sandy was saying, but I wonder, does assimilation have a role to play in tackling this issue?
So yes, for a short answer. So let me give some context. One of the things that I learned early on is I had to understand the unwritten rules of the game. What I mean by that is politics, whether you like it or not, you need to understand what the expectations are. Whether people tell you about it or don't tell you about it in an organization, it exists. So, and by the way, this is something that I always tell people, it is not always about logic. And so get used to that concept. So what you think is logical, what you think should, people you think are, perceiving, gets results, they're not always the ones who get promoted. So assimilation is important. And I was always one of the only, when I was, moving around State Farm, I was one of the only Asian women. So I had to learn what is the expectation? How do the Western, State Farm culture in small cities, small towns, how do they operate? How do the leaders behave? So I went probably pretty far to the right in assimilation in the early part of my career to about probably a second line level leader. And once I realized I kind of felt lost in my roots of being a Korean, coming from Korea as an immigrant at age of 8, I had to kind of recalibrate myself to say, okay, wait, I think I went too far to the right. I have to now come back, get back in touch with my cultural heritage and who I am, which is where I realized where the strength came from. It's not one or the other. It's kind of the culmination of both. And how do you leverage that into a strength and not into a weakness? And so I think I did go too far to the right for a long time. And then I brought myself back. But to your point, I think, one of the things that I realized is that I was at my best when I could bring those Korean values, what's important, what came from my family, the fact that, the women in my family were pretty strong and they had, internal direction about what they wanted to achieve and that they sacrificed so much for me to come here and to have better opportunity. Those were the strengths that I brought to the table. And my bet is regardless of what AANHPI community you come from, my bet is those are very similar, right? I want my family to have a better life. I want my children to have better opportunity. And I didn't forget that. And so how I make decisions, how I treat my people, how I treat the people that report to me, I leverage those values. And I think I'm going to go back to what Ben said about values and your North Star and always coming back to that in order to be who you are. And by the way, with CAPAL, you have to answer the question, who am I and so what? And that is the crux of everything that you do, whatever you decide to do, whatever path you go, whatever decisions you make, if you can do it from who you are, I think that's really the center of it. And the assimilation, you're going to have to do some of that because unless you work for yourself, even then you have to do some assimilating. But ultimately, you can always come back to the core of who you are.
Thank you, Sue-Ann. So to the audience here, we have probably just a couple minutes before we'll switch over to the end of this session. But I want to bring it then back, to the very beginning, right? And the purpose of this session was to connect participants with AANHPI women leaders and representatives to give a voice and to hear about your professional experiences as a minority in public service. So to kind of go around the group here and think once more and last messages for your experience as a professional and as a minority in public service, right? We know that there's discrimination. We know that we face challenges, found different coping mechanisms, the importance of keeping your North Star and your identity. So to think, a lasting thought about your professional experience as a minority in public service. Let's pass it over to Ben first, and then we'll go around the room here.
Yikes. No, well, I think it is, in this space, we've talked a lot about public service, and our responsibility to our communities. In other spaces like this, we've talked about you know, the fact that our ancestors are watching us, right? Like, you know, the duty that we owe in Tagalog, it's called utang na loob, right? Like an inner debt that you owe to your community, to your family. And, you know, to me, you know, for all its, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, for me, public service has always been about thinking about, you know, the communities that I serve, the shoulders of the giants on whose shoulders I stand. And so that actually is what gets me up in the morning, you know, and so the opportunity, and, you know, I've worked on federal policy for a long time. And one of the new things that I'm getting to rediscover about policy work at the local level is actually meeting the people whose lives you're changing. So at the risk of making a plug, the restaurant behind me, Ban Siam, was actually damaged during the recent protests. But they've muddled through. They were about to reopen. They've made a beautiful art mural on the wood that was used to protect their storefront. But meeting business owners like them, who are dear friends, it's owned by this lovely transgender Thai woman. I think that, you know, we get to meet the people that we're serving locally. So I think that that's what I'm gonna leave with, is just the opportunity and the obligation to serve something larger than yourself.
Thank you, Ben. And that is a really nice picture behind you. I like it a lot. So Sandy, over to you. Last words about your professional experience as a minority in public service.
Well, I have to tell you that, you know, I started out helping Vietnamese refugees in DCs. And as a result, founded Asian American Leadership Empowerment and Development, the first Asian American youth development in the region. And then, you know, spent 13 years there, and then, you know, got a fellowship, went to Harvard, and then was able to get an appointment, you know, from President Obama, and then serve on the Vietnam Education Foundation. So I have to say that public service I have benefited tremendously. So I had make long life friends. I had built a community. And I think like what Sherry was saying, you know, is that I feel like uplifting the community, you know, benefited community, but at the same time, I had gained so much personally from being in public service. So, you know, right now I'm doing a lot of leadership training to lots of different groups across the globe. And what I feel that is really important is that you need to do public service because that's your calling, that's your passion, right? And because of that, you will benefit. And, you know, I started in a community that very small community. And, you know, just because I love young people and I love sharing my experience as a refugee teens in this country and how I overcame challenges and were able to get a scholarship and went to college. So I want other young people to do the same. So that's what I did. And I never look back. If I had to do it all again, I would do it because I love it and because of my passion. And so whatever you do, whether you want to devote your life in public service, is that you know that you also gain a lot from it. It's not just you giving, right? It's that you gain a lot from it. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, Sandy. Sue Ann?
I came to public service late in my career. I didn't start working for a nonprofit until 2 years ago. And that was a very conscious choice. And what I realized was that what I was passionate about and my purpose was to be able to take all of my experiences, everything that I bring to the table, and to help AAPI women, number one, not feel alone. And number two, that they are able to achieve their possibilities, as Ben says, or their purpose, and help them figure that out. And I want to learn, and I'm learning tremendous amount from all of these amazing people that I'm meeting that was not in my sphere 2 years ago. So I would say, find your purpose, and it might take multiple times, but that's okay. And number two is there is a community available for you to connect with if you want it. And I think the main thing is I don't want you to be by yourself. And number three is, to learn, continue learning, and to be able to help somebody. So my goal right now, this is a daily goal that I have. This is such a corporate thing for me. I have to help at least 3 people a day, at least. So that's my goal. I have a goal, like, I don't care what it is, I have to help somebody. So that's what I do every day, is like, who have I helped today? And so with that, I feel like I'm in my element right now. I'm just really excited to be doing what I'm doing.
Thank you, Sue Ann. Sherry?
I think about and I often think about this, like, what's my role in the bigger picture of life? And, I think we often wonder that, especially if we're just starting our careers or we're starting new careers, like, really, why are we here? What's our purpose? What's those things? And I find myself always going back to, my role is to bridge and to uplift and to give voice to those that don't. Not that they don't have a voice, but sometimes people don't realize that they do. And you just give them the space to find it and recognize, like, oh my gosh, I do. And I think for me, that is very important, that when I'm having, I'm telling you, there are days that I just think, what the heck? A little bit more colorful language. Like, what am I doing? Like, I feel like it's just this uphill climb that I'm dragging like 10,000 pounds behind me. And it's not that it's impossible. It just gets heavy, and it gets hard. And I think sometimes I just want to give up. And the true sense of a leader, a true resiliency, is that you're not, right? You're going to stop. You're going to reassess what's going on, look around, and see if there is a different way to reach what you need to reach. I think sometimes we, again, forget that there are many paths to the outcomes we want to see, right? There's more than one way to skin a cat. There's all these pathways, but we somehow get stuck that there's just one way to do it and get there to that outcome we want. And there really isn't. We just got to stop, take off the backpack and all the weights we're carrying, and look around. And what we fail to recognize sometimes is there's a lot of people who want to support us and help us. And we forget to look around and be okay in asking to have those opportunities. I was looking for this quote because, that's kind of what helps me kind of recognize that, it's not as bad as you think it is. There's always somebody else that may be struggling in a different way, in a harder way. And so it puts things in perspective very quickly. The quote is, "People who are truly strong lift others up. People who are truly powerful bring others together." And that's I think it encapsulates what I think is, if I want people to be successful, if I want people to help, move the dial on something, then we got to give them the tools, the skills, the knowledge, the willingness to know that they can. And I can just, we provide that. We provide the support and the safe space for them to recognize that in themselves. But that quote was from Michelle Obama, right? When we look at a true public servant, amazing. And again, when you talk about that, you also talk about leadership. And we talk a little bit about our leaders and our bosses and stuff, but when we talk about true leadership, it's not just managing the people, it's leading them. It's recognizing your own areas that you got to continually work on. And I think that's a big difference, is leaders. And this quote to me is that, whether you uplift, whether you bring together, that's a sign of leadership. And I think that's really an important aspect to think of. So those are my closing words, that, you know, it's that introspective piece that's just as important of what to what you show on the outside. All of that's really important. So thank you for letting me drop my little tidbit of knowledge from Michelle Obama.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And you know, that does conclude our panel discussion today. And most importantly, I want to thank actually the participants who have joined us today. You know, we have over 37 plus CAPAL members and alumni joining us today. And it's because of this audience that because of you all, that we were inspired to pull this panel discussion together. So as Sherry was saying, you know, it was your leadership that helped put this panel together. And of course, thank you very much to Ben, Sue-Ann, Sandy, and Sherry's time this evening for giving us real actionable items, ways to enact change, to think about our own identity, our own challenges, how to overcome them, and to remind us that this is the community that, you know, this community, the audience that we have here, the people here on this panel, this is a community that we have to strengthen and think about public service moving forward. So thank you again for all your time. And with that, I apologize again if I couldn't get to everyone's questions, but I am going to transition this over to Sue-Ann for the evening. She's going to give us a spotlight on resources from CAPAW on how to face these challenges. So over to you, Sue-Ann. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Fantastic job keeping us all organized. We needed that as a group, so thank you. So if you, Young, I don't know if you got the information that I've put together, and you guys, this is a kind of information for a lot of different things. So as an example, when I think about public service, you know, I think about things like being informed, you know, and this weekend, as an example, we have the presidential town hall that's sponsored by APIA Vote. We've got, you know, for education, we've got OCA and CAPAL coming together to have a conference called Elevate the Shiro and You the week of June 13th. It's free. You guys are more than welcome to attend. And I want to give another resource. I've included articles from McKinsey on COVID-19 effect on minority-owned small businesses. The National Asian Chamber of Commerce has some information for that's very helpful. Then hopefully most of you have seen the broadcast, the Asian Americans, but if you haven't, here's the link to that, the Stop AAPI Hate, and US Census information and contact if you need to get more information, because, you know, we're a nonpartisan organization. One thing that I do push is, hey, we still need to be counted. So we talked a little bit about that. And then the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans. This is an organization that has 37 organizations as part of its membership. And we are doing a lot of work in regards to, you know, anti-Asian hate, policy, language services, and all the things that we're talking about for public service. And then I also included the Smithsonian, you know, 12 Women to Know, because, you know, of course, we're a women's organization. So, you know, I have to put one thing in there from a women's perspective. And for children, if you have not seen the CNN Sesame Street Race Town Hall, that was pretty excellent. So I just put together a whole list of different resources for you, and so that you can pick and choose what you'd like to take a look at, so all in one place. So I think Young's gonna send this out to all of our attendees for your use. Back to you, Samantha.
Thank you, Sue-Ann. All right, I think with that, thank you very much to all the panels again and speakers. Sue-Ann, thank you for those resources. I'm going to pass it back over to Liz this evening to help close it away.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Sue-Ann, for those resources. Thank you, Samantha, Sherry, Sue-Ann, and Ben for your thoughtful conversation this evening. I know it was great to hear all your tidbits of wisdom, and especially your last parting words. I think were all really awesome. But before everyone logs off, there are just a couple points I want to mention, so hang on for just a little bit. We have more events coming up. Next Wednesday, we're going to have our 4th Washington Leadership Program. It's going to be on immigration. It's called The Hidden Faces of Immigration. And that session is going to focus on major immigration issues and the challenges that we face today, and will highlight prominent AANHPIs in policymaking and public service within this subject matter. Key discussions Key topics of discussion will include issues such as sanctuary cities, undocumented migration, family sponsorship, work visas, refugees, and comprehensive immigration forum. You can visit our website, www.capal.org, to register and learn more about our upcoming events. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and sign up for our newsletter. Secondly, just want to remind you all that CAPAL started as an all-volunteer organization, and we have grown since then have grown to serve more than 600 scholars and interns, and have awarded over $360,000 to support public service careers for both undergraduate and graduate students. Your contributions are valuable to help us continue this type of work. So please donate, whether once or on a recurring basis, on our website. We also ask that you spread the word about our scholarship and internship program, which opens for applications every November. We encourage you to refer any students, organizations, or university career centers to us. And if your organization is interested in sponsoring or partnering with us, please contact our managing director, Shama Ahmed, at shama.ahmad@capal.org. And lastly, one quick reminder, we do have a survey, so as soon as you log off, it will show up on your screen. Please take a minute to fill that out. We really appreciate your honest feedback and contributions. It helps us inform the next round of WLP. So thank you all so much. Have a great night.